Here's another full video for taking the TOEFL test. I searched the internet, especially YouTube and some websites, and there is nothing new. You know what I mean? All of them are old, some of them are not fresh. That's why I made this fresh video for you. It's about 2 hours, so don't start until you're fully ready. And for those who are asking about the answers will be in the description. How to know your score: this is for reading section, this is for listening section. Just accumulate them and see what you got for the raw scores and what you got for the score itself for the test. I also made TOEFL templates for you for the speaking and the writing. They are the best. I made a lot of research about it and I made it with the team, so it's gonna be in the description as usual below. Finally, there is a course that I made. Now we have more than 22,000 students. I can't believe it too, but you can visit the website, the Udemy itself, and you can find the landing page over there. That's what I have. Let's start the video.
Listen to a conversation between a student and her photography professor.
Professor Johnson, there's something that's been on my mind.
Okay.
Remember last week you told us that it's really important to get our photography into a show, basically as soon as we can?
Yep, it's a big step, no question.
Thing is, I'm sitting here and I'm just not sure how I'd get there. I mean, I've got some work I like, but is it really what a gallery is looking for? How would I know? How do I make the right contacts to get into a show? I just really don't...
Okay, hold on, slow down. These are questions that, well, just about every young artist has to struggle with. Okay, the first thing you should do is you absolutely have to stay true to your artistic vision. Take the pictures you want to take. Don't start trying to catch the flavor of the month and be trendy because you think you'll get into a show. That never works because you wind up creating something you don't really believe in. It's uninspired and won't make any shows. I've seen it happen so many times. This doesn't mean that you should go into a cave. Keep up with trends. Even think about how your work might fit in with them, but don't mindlessly follow them.
Well, yeah, I can see that. I think, though, that I've always been able to stay pretty true to what I want to create, not what others want me to create. I think that comes through in my work.
Okay, just remember that it's one thing to create work that you really want to create when it's in the classroom. The only thing at stake is your grade. But work created outside the classroom, that can be a different story. Now, I'm not talking about technique or things like that. It's just that there's so much more at stake when you're out there making art for a living. There's a lot of pressure to become something you're not, and people often surrender to that pressure.
But to get stuff exhibited...
Well, you need to be a bit of an opportunist. Common sense things like always having a sample of your work on hand to give to people. You won't believe the kind of contacts and opportunities you can get this way. And try to get your work seen in places like restaurants, bookstores. You'd be surprised how word gets around about photography in places like that.
Okay. It's just so hard to think about all of those practical things and make good work, you know?
Listen again to part of the conversation, then answer the question.
I think, though, that I've always been able to stay pretty true to what I want to create, not what others want me to create. I think that comes through in my work.
Why does the student say this?
I think that comes through in my work.
Listen to part of a lecture in a marine biology class.
We know whales are mammals and that they evolved from land creatures. So the mystery is figuring out how they became ocean dwellers. Because until recently, there was no fossil record of what we call the missing link. That is, evidence of species that show the transition between land-dwelling mammals and today's whales. Fortunately, some recent fossil discoveries have made the picture a little bit clearer. For example, a few years back in Pakistan, they found the skull of a wolf-like creature. It was about 50 million years old. Scientists had seen this wolf-like creature before, but this skull was different. The ear area of the skull had characteristics seen only in aquatic mammals, specifically whales. Then also in Pakistan, they found the fossil of another creature, which we call Ambulocetus natans. That's a mouthful, eh? The name Ambulocetus natans comes from Latin, of course, and means walking whale that swims. It clearly had 4 limbs that could have been used for walking. It also had a long, thin tail, typical of mammals, something we don't see in today's whales. But it also had a long skeletal structure, and that long skeletal structure suggests that it was aquatic. And very recently, in Egypt, they found a skeleton of Basilosaurus. Basilosaurus was a creature that we had already known about for over 100 years, and it has been linked to modern whales because of its long whale-like body. But this new fossil find showed a full set of leg bones, something we didn't have before. The legs were too small to be useful. They weren't even connected to its pelvis and couldn't have supported its weight. But it clearly shows Basilosaurus's evolution from land creatures. So that's a giant step in the right direction. Even better, it establishes Ambulocetus as a clear link between the wolf-like creature and Basilosaurus. Now, these discoveries don't completely solve the mystery. I mean, Ambulocetus is a mammal that shows a sort of bridge between walking on land and swimming, but it also is very different from the whales we know today. So really, we are working with just a few pieces of a big puzzle. A related debate involves some recent DNA studies. Remember, DNA is the genetic code for any organism, and when the DNA from 2 different species is similar, it suggests that those 2 species are related. And when we compared some whale DNA with DNA from some other species, we got quite a surprise. The DNA suggests that whales are descendants of the hippopotamus. Yes, the hippopotamus. Well, that came as a bit of a shock. I mean that a 4-legged land and river dweller could be the evolutionary source of a completely aquatic creature up to 25 times its size? Unfortunately, this revelation about the hippopotamus apparently contradicts the fossil record, which suggests that the hippopotamus is only a very distant relative of the whale, not an ancestor. And of course, as I mentioned, that whales are descended not from hippos, but from that distant wolf-like creature. So we have contradictory evidence. And more research might just raise more questions and create more controversies. At any rate, we have a choice. We can believe the molecular data, the DNA, or we can believe the skeleton trail. But unfortunately, probably not both. And there have been some other interesting findings from DNA research. For a long time, we assumed that all whales that had teeth, including sperm whales and killer whales, were closely related to one another. And the same for the toothless whales, like the blue whale and other baleen whales. We assumed that they'd be closely related. But recent DNA studies suggest that that's not the case at all. The sperm whale is actually closely related to the baleen whale, and it's only distantly related to the toothed whales. So that was a real surprise to all of us.
Listen to part of a lecture in a European history class.
So would it surprise you to learn that many of the foods that we today consider traditional European dishes, that their key ingredients were not even known in Europe until quite recently? Until the Europeans started trading with the native peoples of North and South America? I mean, you're probably aware that the Americas provided Europe and Asia with foods like squash, beans, turkey, peanuts. But what about all those Italian tomato sauces, Hungarian goulash, or my favorite, French fries, those yummy fried potatoes?
Wait, I knew potatoes were from where, South America?
South America, right, the Andes Mountains.
But you're saying tomatoes too? I just assumed since they're used in so many Italian dishes.
No, like potatoes, tomatoes grew wild in the Andes, although unlike potatoes, they weren't originally cultivated there. That seems to have occurred first in Central America. And even then, the tomato doesn't appear to have been very important as a food plant until the Europeans came on the scene. They took it back to Europe with them around 1550, and Italy was indeed the first place where it was widely grown as a food crop. So, in a sense, it really is more Italian than American. And another thing, and this is true of both the potato and the tomato, both of these plants are members of the nightshade family. The nightshade family is a category of plants which also includes many that you wouldn't want to eat, like mandrake, belladonna, and even tobacco. So it's no wonder that people once considered tomatoes and potatoes to be inedible too, even poisonous. And in fact, the leaves of the potato plant are quite toxic. So it took both plants quite a while to catch on in Europe, and even longer before they made the return trip to North America and became popular food items here.
Yeah, I remember my grandmother telling me that when her mother was a little girl, a lot of people still thought that tomatoes were poisonous.
Oh, sure. People didn't really start eating them here until the mid-1800s.
But, it seems like I heard, didn't Thomas Jefferson grow them or something?
Ah, well, that's true. But then Jefferson is known not only as the third president of the United States, but also as a scholar who was way ahead of his time in many ways. He didn't let the conventional thinking of his day restrain his ideas. Now, potatoes went through a similar sort of a rejection process, especially when they were first introduced in Europe. You know how potatoes can turn green if they're left in the light too long, and that greenish skin can make the potato taste bitter, even make you ill. So that was enough to put people off for over 200 years. Yes, Bill?
I'm sorry, Professor Jones, but yeah, okay, American crops have probably contributed a lot to European cooking over the years, but...
But have they really played any kind of important role in European history? Well, as a matter of fact, yes. I was just coming to that. Let's start with North American corn, or maize, as it's often called. Now, before the Europeans made contact with the Americas, they subsisted mainly on grains that often suffered from crop failures. And it's largely for this reason that political power in Europe was centered for centuries in the south, around the Mediterranean Sea, which was where they could grow these grains with more reliability. But when corn came to Europe from Mexico, well, now they had a much hardier crop that could be grown easily in more northerly climates, and the centers of power began to shift accordingly. And then, well, as I said, potatoes weren't really popular at first, but when they finally did catch on, which they did first in Ireland around 1780, well, why do you suppose it happened? Because potatoes had the ability to provide an abundant and extremely nutritious food crop. No other crop grown in Northern Europe at the time had anything like the number of vitamins contained in potatoes. Plus, potatoes grown on a single acre of land could feed many more people than, say, wheat grown on that same land. Potatoes soon spread to France and other Northern European countries, and as a result, the nutrition of the general population improved tremendously, and populations soared in the early 1800s. And so the shift of power from Southern to Northern Europe continued.
Listen again to part of the lecture. Then answer the question.
I'm sorry, Professor Jones, but yeah, okay, American crops have probably contributed a lot to European cooking over the years, but
But have they really played any kind of important role in European history? Well, as a matter of fact, yes. I was just coming to that.
What can be inferred about the professor when she says this?
But have they really played any kind of important role in European history?
Listen to a conversation between a student and an employee in the university bookstore.
Hi, I bought this book at the beginning of the semester, but something's come up and I'd like to return it.
Well, for a full refund, store policy is that you have to return merchandise 2 weeks from the time it was purchased. But for assigned textbooks or anything having to do with specific courses... Wait, was it for a specific course?
Yeah, but actually...
Well, for course books, the deadline is 4 weeks after the beginning of the semester. So for this fall semester, the deadline was October 1st.
Ouch. Then I missed it. But why October 1st?
I guess the reasoning is that by October 1st, the semester is in full gear, and everyone kind of knows what courses they'll be taking that semester.
I get it. So it's mainly for people who decide to withdraw from... to change to new courses early on.
Exactly. The books have to be in perfect condition, of course. They can't be marked up or look used in any way. For the full refund, I mean.
Well, but see, my situation is a little different. I hoped you might be able to make an exception.
Well, the policies are generally pretty rigid, and the semester is almost over.
Okay, here's what happened. I think my professor really miscalculated. Anyway, the syllabus was way too ambitious in my opinion. There are only 2 weeks of classes left in the semester, and there are like 6 books on the syllabus that we haven't even touched.
I see. So you were hoping to return this one?
Yeah, the professor already announced that we won't be reading this one by Jane Bowles, and all the others I bought used.
Jane Bowles? Which book of hers?
It's called Two Serious Ladies.
Oh, but you should keep that one. Are you interested in literature?
Well, I am an English major.
You're lucky to have a professor who includes a lesser-known writer like her on the syllabus. You know, not the usual authors we've all read.
So you really think
I do, and especially if you're into literature.
Well, this I wasn't expecting. I mean, wow.
I hope you don't think I'm being too pushy. If you prefer, you can return the book and arrange for a store credit. You don't qualify for a refund. Policy is policy, after all. But you can make an exchange, and you can use the credit for your books for next semester. The credit carries over from one semester to the next.
Well, that's good to know, but now I'm really intrigued. I guess that just because we ran out of time to read this book in class doesn't mean that I can't read it on my own time. You know, I think I'll give it a try.
What does the man mean when he says this?
Well, this I wasn't expecting. I mean, wow.
Listen to part of a lecture in an ecology class.
So, we've been talking about nutrients, the elements in the environment that are essential for living organisms to develop, live a healthy life, and reproduce. Some nutrients are quite scarce. There just isn't much of them in the environment. But fortunately, they get recycled. When nutrients are used over and over in the environment, we call that a nutrient cycle. Because of the importance of nutrients and their scarcity, nutrient recycling is one of the most significant ecosystem processes that we'll cover in this course. The three most important nutrient cycles are the nitrogen cycle, the carbon cycle, and the one we're going to talk about today, the phosphorus cycle. So, the phosphorus cycle has been studied a lot by ecologists because, like I said, phosphorus is an important nutrient, and it's not so abundant. The largest quantities are found in rocks and at the bottom of the ocean. How does phosphorus get there? Well, let's start with the phosphorus in rocks. The rocks get broken down into smaller and smaller particles as they're weathered. They're weathered slowly by rain and wind over long periods of time. Phosphorus is slowly released as the rocks are broken down, and it gets spread around into the soil. Once it's in the soil, plants absorb it through their roots.
So that's the reason people mine rocks that contain a lot of phosphorus? To help with agriculture?
Uh-huh. They mine the rock, artificially break it down, and put the phosphorus into agricultural fertilizers. So humans can play a role in the first part of the phosphorus cycle, the breaking down of rocks and the spreading of phosphorus into the soil, by speeding up the rate at which this natural process occurs, you see? Now, after the phosphorus is in the soil, plants grow. They use phosphorus from the soil to grow. And when they die, they decompose. And the phosphorus is recycled back into the soil. Same thing with the animals that eat those plants, or eat other animals that have eaten those plants. We call all of this the land phase of the phosphorus cycle. But a lot of the phosphorus in the soil gets washed away into rivers by rain and melting snow. And so begins another phase of the cycle. Can anyone guess what it's called? Nancy?
Well, if the one is called the land phase, then this has to be called the water phase, right?
Yes. That's such a difficult point, isn't it? In a normal water phase, rivers eventually empty into oceans, and once in the oceans, the phosphorus gets absorbed by water plants, like algae. Then fish eat the algae, or eat other fish that have eaten those plants. But the water phase is sometimes affected by excessive fertilizers. If not all of the phosphorus gets used by the crops and large amounts of phosphorus gets into the rivers, this could cause rapid growth of water plants in the river, which can lead to the waterways getting clogged with organisms, which can change the flow of the water. Several current studies are looking at these effects, and I really do hope we can find a way to deal with this issue before these ecosystems are adversely affected. Okay? Of course, another way that humans can interrupt the normal process is fishing. The fishing industry helps bring phosphorus back to land. In the normal water phase, the remaining phosphorus makes its way, settles, to the bottom of the ocean and gets mixed into ocean sediments. But remember, this is a cycle. The phosphorus at the bottom of the ocean has to somehow make its way back to the surface to complete the cycle, to begin the cycle all over again. After millions of years, powerful geological forces like underwater volcanoes lift up the ocean sediments to form new land. When an underwater volcano pushes submerged rock to the surface, a new island is created. Then, over many more years, the phosphorus-rich rocks of the new land begin to erode. and the cycle continues.
What about, well, you said that the nitrogen cycle is also an important nutrient cycle, and there's a lot of nitrogen in the atmosphere, so I was wondering, is there a lot of phosphorus in the atmosphere too?
Good question, George. You're right to guess that phosphorus can end up in Earth's atmosphere. It can move from the land or from the oceans to the atmosphere, and vice versa. However, there's just not a substantial amount of it there, like there is with nitrogen. It's a very minimal quantity.
Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
Can anyone guess what it's called? Nancy?
Well, if the one is called the land phase, then this has to be called the water phase, right?
Yes. That's such a difficult point, isn't it?
What does the professor mean when she says this?
That's such a difficult point, isn't it?
In task 1, you will be asked to speak about a familiar topic. Give yourself 15 seconds to prepare your response. Then, record yourself speaking for 45 seconds.
Talk about a time when you accomplished something you did not think you could do. What did you accomplish? Why did you think you could not do it?
You will now read a short passage and listen to a conversation on the same topic. You will then be asked a question about them. After you hear the question, give yourself 30 seconds to prepare your response. Then record yourself speaking for 60 seconds.
Read a student letter in the university newspaper. You have 45 seconds to read the letter. Begin reading now. Now listen to two students discussing the letter.
Mary, you're an art student. What do you think of this letter?
I don't like the idea.
Why not?
Well, first of all, his first point about a lot of people passing through the student center, that's true, but it's always really crowded with people coming and going. It's not good for showing artwork. Imagine you're standing there, trying to look at a painting. There's going to be like 1 million people walking through. People walking in front of you, blocking your view, distracting you.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
You won't be able to appreciate the artwork or get a good look at anything with so much going on, with so many people moving around.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Plus, he's wrong about the windows.
But isn't it true that it's good for art to have lots of light?
In a sense, yeah. But that kind of light, all that natural light from windows, that's actually not good. Because if it's really sunny out, it'll be way too bright. If it's cloudy, it'll be way too dark.
Oh.
What you want is controlled light, consistent light, the kind you get from electric light bulbs. Think about in an art museum. In an art museum, you've got electric lighting, and the light is always carefully controlled, always at the same level.
Briefly summarize the proposal in the student's letter. Then state the woman's opinion about the proposal and explain the reason she gives for holding that opinion.
You will now read a short passage and listen to a lecture on the same topic. You will then be asked a question about them. After you hear the question, give yourself 30 seconds to prepare your response. Then record yourself speaking for 60 seconds.
Read a passage from a marketing textbook. You have 50 seconds to read the passage. Begin reading now. Now listen to a lecture from a marketing class.
Okay, so I've actually got a few different examples of this. When I was a kid, a character named Action Hero was really popular with my friends and me. We would always watch the Action Hero program on television every week and play games, pretending that we were as strong and powerful as he was. Then pretty soon we began seeing these small action hero figures in all the stores. And, well, we all just had to have them. I mean, we'd been watching the television show for so long that it seemed only natural to want to own the toys, too. Well, I finally grew up and left the Action Hero television program and toys behind. But now I have a 7-year-old daughter who watches television a lot and also likes to play with her toys. And lately, her favorite toy is a cute little baby doll with a big round face and lots of curly hair named Rosa. All my daughter's friends have Rosa dolls, too, and they enjoy going to each other's houses to play with them. Then a few weeks ago, my daughter came running up to me all excited because she had just heard there was going to be a new television program on every week with the doll, Rosa, as the main character. So naturally, she and all her friends have begun watching the show, and it's already very popular as the toy doll.
Using the examples from the lecture, explain the concept of entertainment merchandising.
You will now listen to part of a lecture. You will then be asked a question about it. After you hear the question, give yourself 20 seconds to prepare your response. Then record yourself speaking for 60 seconds.
Listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class.
Okay, we generally assume that babies can feel only very basic emotions like happiness or anger. That is, that babies just react to things that happen directly to them. However, some new research is suggesting that babies may be able to feel concern for others, to have empathy for others. Now, empathy is a complex emotion. It involves a baby relating to someone else's emotions, not just reacting to things happening directly to them. Let's talk about an experiment that may show that babies could be capable of feeling empathy. Okay, for the first part of the experiment, we've always known that babies start to cry when they hear other babies crying, right? One baby in a room starts crying and all the rest join in. We've always assumed that the other babies cried because they were reacting to the noise of the crying, that the noise itself was distressing. So, in the experiment, researchers played a tape recording, a tape of babies crying, to another baby. And sure enough, the baby started crying when he heard the sound of other babies crying. This was no surprise, of course, and the researchers assumed that the baby cried because of the noise. But the next part of the experiment was surprising. The researchers played the baby a tape of his own crying. Now, it was just as noisy, so the researchers expected him to cry. However, this time, the baby did not cry. He wasn't upset by the sound of his own crying. Why not? Well, maybe it wasn't the noise that had made him cry before when he heard other babies crying. In fact, maybe noise had nothing to do with it. It could be that the baby felt empathy for the other babies, and that was why he got upset when he heard them crying. The researchers concluded that it is indeed possible that babies feel empathy, concern for others.
Using the points from the lecture, explain why researchers think that babies may feel empathy. Now listen to part of a lecture on the topic you just read about.
Well, ongoing investigations have revealed that predation is the most likely cause of sea otter decline after all. First, the pollution theory is weakened by the fact that no one can really find any dead sea otters washing up on Alaskan beaches. That's not what you would expect if infections caused by pollution started killing a lot of otters. On the other hand, the fact that it's so hard to find dead otters is consistent with the predator hypothesis. If an otter is killed by a predator, it's eaten immediately so it can't wash up on shore. Second, although orcas may prefer to hunt whales, whales have essentially disappeared from the area because of human hunters. That means that orcas have had to change their diet to survive, and since only smaller sea mammals are now available, orcas have probably started hunting those. So it probably is the orcas that are causing the decline of all the smaller sea mammals mentioned in the passage, the seals, the sea lions, and the sea otters. And third, the uneven pattern of otter decline is better explained by the orca predation theory than by the pollution theory. What happens to otters seems to depend on whether the location where they live is accessible to orcas or not. In those locations that orcas can access easily, the number of sea otters has declined greatly. However, because orcas are so large, they can't access shallow or rocky locations. And shallow and rocky locations are precisely the types of locations where sea otter populations have not declined.
Summarize the points made in the lecture, being sure to explain how they respond to the specific points made in the reading passage.
Great job! You've taken the full test and only 5% of people make it to the end. No need to take anything more, no need to do anything, just take rest, subscribe to if there's anything new or something like that, and I shall see you in other video. Good luck.